Our guest speaker today is Deborah Humphreys. She received her Bachelor's of Arts degree from Williams College in Art History and her PhD in English from Rutgers University. Dr. Humphreys is currently the Vice President for Policy and Public Engagement at the Association of American Colleges and Universities, a position she assumed in early 2013, after serving for 11 years as the Vice President for Communication and Public Affairs at AAC&U. Prior to 2001, she served as Director of Programs in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Global Initiatives at AAC&U, where she directed programs on women's issues and diversity in higher education. Before coming to AAC&U in 1992, she taught women's studies and English at Rutgers University, Towson State, and the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. She also served as Program Associate at the National Women's Studies Association. Without further ado, let's welcome Deborah Humphreys.
Thank you so much, Barb, and I want to thank Joe and Barb and Carrie and the whole team for inviting me here and being such a wonderful host, and also for helping introduce me to Boston College and all that you are doing. I just had the great privilege of being able to talk with some of your students. I don't always get to do that, so I'm very, very grateful to have been able to do that. And certainly, if those students I talk to are exemplary of the kinds of students you are educating, I'm not sure you even need this talk. I think they're in great shape. They're going to be just fine. They were amazing people, all of whom I'm certain are getting an education that will help them live lives of purpose and meaning and flourishing. So I'm really excited to be here to talk with you about this challenge. It is certainly in the DNA of Boston College to constantly be questioning how we are doing this, but to keep to the enduring values of Boston College, which is really, I think, all about ensuring that our education is preparing students for lives of purpose and meaning. I'm going to talk today a lot about the transition from college to career, but I actually want to begin in a different kind of place. And I'm going to organize my remarks this afternoon around questions, the questions that our students bring to us as young people, the questions that we need to ask ourselves as we design educational programs that will really serve them and our communities better, and the choices that we and they are making. And I want to begin with the last 4 lines from a poem that I quite like, from Mary Oliver, called The Summer Day. Some of you may know her. And I decided I really wanted to start with poetry, because in a talk where I'm about to give you a whole lot of information about the economy and sort of dry stats and stuff like that, I wanted to remind both myself and the audience that I am one of those people who still believes the humanities and literature are essential to our lives and to our communities, and that they can teach us something about living lives of purpose and meaning. I know most of the people in this room probably think that, but a lot of people outside of higher education seem to not think that anymore. So I thought I would start with some poetry. And just in a way to also remind us, those of us who have been in higher education a long time, it's always really useful, probably the student affairs people don't need this reminding, that students come to us with a lot of questions. And with some of the questions they're asking about what they should be doing, what they should have done, what they need to do, how they're going to really plan to do, and what they're going to plan to do with their wild and precious life. Those are questions that are very serious, and they're often asked in a climate of fear, which is really something that I think it's our job to help them to really make not just a fearful question, but an exploratory question, a joyful question that they can ask, continue to ask, and that we can help them answer. So one of the other things that I'm going to do in my talk is draw on some resources from a project that AAC&U has been conducting and facilitating for about a decade, called LEAP, Liberal Education in America's Promise. And it's a complicated multi-project initiative, but basically we started it 10 years ago. And it's a different kind of project than AAC&U has traditionally done. AAC&U is 100-year-old organization. We are exclusively devoted to the issue of what makes a quality undergraduate education. But we have traditionally worked pretty in an insular way with our members, 1,350 colleges and universities all across the country, like Boston College and many others, to how do we improve the undergraduate program. But with LEAP, we thought, okay, we really need to start looking, we need more peripheral vision. We need to look more broadly at what are we preparing students for, what is the environment in which we're working and in which they will be working. And we had a sense, actually, that there was an emerging consensus out there about the most important elements of a quality undergraduate education. And because we had that sense, we thought the time was right, about 10 years ago, to launch an initiative that was both inwardly focused as well as externally focused. And in 2007, we released a report, College Learning for the New Global Century, and we had developed it in collaboration with some leaders in business, in K-12 education, in higher education, in policy, in civic communities, and so forth. And we tried to sort of sketch out what is the world that we're preparing students for, and what are the most important things in that world that we need to pay attention to as we develop meaningful curricular pathways for our students. This is just one quote in a much longer report, which you can find on our website. And really, it's all about disruption and interdependence. And this was true 10 years ago, and I would say it's even more true today. And the LEAP initiative is also organized around a set of questions. Some big but simple questions in some ways. If this is the world we're preparing students for, how do we educate students? For not just getting a job in that world, but for flourishing in that world, for becoming leaders in that world, for helping our society become the kind of society we and they need it to be. It's a big question. But we've also sort of broken it down, because it's kind of too big a question to ask. And we said, okay, so if this is the world that we're trying to educate students for, no matter what they major in, no matter what their pathway into and through college, what are the essential things that every Boston College student needs to know and be able to do? What are the essential learning elements, the learning outcomes, the aims that we're shooting for? And what are the set of educational practices that are most likely to get us to those outcomes? And I want to stress that over these past 10 years, of course, a lot has happened in America. And while we absolutely understood 10 years ago that part of the questions that students bring to us have to do with professional success and how college is going to set them up for that, that's not the only purpose of college. We have never thought that. We do not think it now. I would say that the economic case for liberal education and for higher education has become more and more urgent, urgently needed to be made well over the course of the LEAP initiative. But we have tried very hard throughout it to keep in the forefront of our planning as higher education institutions and our advocacy with external constituents. The idea that college is not only about work. It is about long-term professional development, but it is also about responsible citizenship, and it's about flourishing as whole people in the world. And I want to say, particularly around the citizenship question, America is quite unique in having an educational tradition and a higher education tradition that has always prioritized building civic capacity, building democratic capacity, the capacity of leaders, the capacity of citizens for self-government. And from the very beginning, from Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin had a slightly different version, but it was all focused on how much our education will really determine the success or failure of our democracy. And I think that's still true today. And I'll come back to that in a moment. So as we did an analysis of what it was that characterized that world that we're preparing students for, there was one really powerful message that we felt came through, whether you looked at it through the lens of citizenship or whether you looked at it through the lens of just well-being in such a complex global environment, or whether you look through the lens of the economy. And the main message is that narrow learning is not enough. If you're narrowly trained, you are not going to be able to flourish over the long term in this society and in this economy. And we developed, in concert with our members, first and foremost, and then in consultation with employers, business leaders, and policymakers, a set of what we have come to call essential learning outcomes. This is not the whole list. There's actually component elements in each of these 4 categories. But I wanted to focus a little bit on these big categories of what's essential about a quality education. And knowledge remains incredibly important. I think that actually often when you talk in employment circles, they sort of skip over this and they go straight to the skill part of this conversation. We'll come back to that in a minute. Of course, what you'll also notice, since you're at Boston College and you know the tradition of both Jesuit education and liberal education very well, there are some tried and true things on this list. A good quality liberal education has always been about preparing students with knowledge of human culture and of the world in which they're going to make their lives, right? That has always been part of what we're about. But we also live in a knowledge explosion environment, right? So I'm not sure it was ever true that we could have provided people with every bit of knowledge they would ever need. I'm not sure that was ever true. But it is certainly not true now, right? We know that we're not going to be able to fill their brains with all the knowledge they're going to need. But we also know that in a knowledge economy, knowing how to work with knowledge, knowing how to evaluate knowledge, knowing how to use knowledge, and having had practice engaging with the big questions of our time around these issues is something that has to be at the core of a good liberal education. And I know that you, in your program, have also been organizing experiments about how to organize general education around interdisciplinary, I think you don't call them big questions, you call them enduring, thank you, enduring questions. So enduring and contemporary, maybe we're all on the same page on this particular avenue into the knowledge. So knowledge remains really important, but maybe the way we organize the curriculum to provide that knowledge needs to change over time to ensure that it is relevant and engaging to students, and to ensure that we are really building their capacity to work with knowledge. And of course, it is only through engagement with real concrete knowledge communities that you develop the intellectual and practical skills. So I'll come to this in a minute. The employers are all about things like communication skills and critical thinking and all these things. But you really, if you think about that, you don't learn to write about nothing, right? You only become a good writer by engaging with real content. It's always a kind of joint activity. And you don't critically think in the abstract, right? You learn to critically think by engagement with real-world issues and with real knowledge communities. The other thing that we have talked about in the LEAP initiative is how there is a very distinct difference between the economy, for instance, that my working class dad was prepared to be successful in, and the one we're in now. And we very intentionally named the second category intellectual and practical skills. And I want to suggest today that intellectual skills are practical skills, and they are not as divided as we may have had before in earlier eras, when there were working class jobs that required mostly manual skills, and then there were the other kind of white-collar jobs that only required intellectual skills. Those categories are really blurring now. Some jobs that sort of sound blue-collar, the crane operator, requires very high levels of technical and quantitative reasoning skills, higher than I might have had in my good liberal education at Williams College. We also at ASCNU have always stressed that a good liberal education should and can enable students to live lives of personal and social responsibility, and that we should not run away from that. It's always great for me to be a Jesuit or Catholic institution, since you guys just embrace that and don't run away from it. That's not always true in American higher education. Public institutions are a little more nervous about this. But one of the things we've also talked about in the LEAP initiative is that developing personal and social responsibility today really requires engagement with diverse communities. The diverse communities on our campuses, the diverse communities and the justice issues that we are all talking about outside our campuses and on our campuses. That those two things are intertwined. And then finally, we kind of call this last category the 21st century liberal arts. Because of that knowledge explosion, because we're in an innovation-driven knowledge economy that is global. The name of the game isn't what you know, it's how you take what you know and can transfer it and apply it in new settings. Because change is happening so quickly that if you know something but you can only apply it in one setting, you're going to be in trouble. And one of the things one of the business leaders said to us in one of our focus groups was, well, you know, you're graduating people who can really solve problems pretty well if they look exactly like the problem looked in the textbook. But you know what? None of our problems look like the nice, neat little ones in the textbooks. The problems are messy, they're complicated, the people with whom they have to solve those problems don't look like them, don't speak like them, don't know anything like they do. So the transfer of knowledge, which of course is the toughest educational challenge, right? Those of you who are faculty know that. The other thing that we want to suggest today is that this is sort of the good news for those of us who care a lot about education for citizenship as well as education for work. The truth is that it's not an either-or choice. That the very capacities that would enable you to be a responsible citizen, to judge elections and referendums, and to help your communities make good choices as citizens, are the same capacities that actually are needed in a global economy. It's not an either-or choice. I also though want to say that it's very hard in the current environment to lose sight of this particular point, because we are helping graduates prepare themselves for professional success, but we also know that they are asking questions that are spiritual questions, that are questions of meaning in their lives, that are deeper than just what are the skills I need to get a job, right? They are asking those questions, we should be helping them ask those questions, and we should be helping them explore their own spiritual identities through their engagement with the curriculum. But, of course, this is the question on their minds, it's the question on their parents' minds. It's not surprising that that question is there. They want lives of meaning and purpose, but they also are very nervous. And we live in a capitalist society where jobs really matter. And we'll talk a little bit about that. They asked this question, but I want to share with you a little bit of data to expand our view of how they're asking this question. So this is some results from a survey of NACE, the National Association of Colleges and Employers, who asked college students, including 20,000 graduating seniors, about what was most important in terms of their attributes for their desired employment. And the reason I share this is just to show where the high starting salary is, which is not at the top of the list. It's on the list, but it's number 5 on the list, right? And our students care a lot about success in the world, but they do define it pretty broadly, even when they're just talking about professional work. This is another survey done by Hart Research in 2011. This was high school students in terms of their own job or career aspirations. And again, by very big numbers, their top choice was work that I find interesting or care about. And the making a lot of money, only 18% chose that as the top thing. So, all that set aside, I do want to talk a little bit about why I think narrow learning is not enough, and why I think those outcomes I just talked about are so essential. And what we've done in the LEAP initiative is 2 strategies. We tried to look at big economic trends through economic research. Not that we're doing ourselves, but that others are doing. And then we've tried to put that right next to some surveys that we've done of employers, where we've asked them directly, what do you need? What do I have to do to be successful at your current company? And I'm going to share this data with you, both of those things. So we've been very influenced by 2 economists, Frank Levy and Richard Bernard. Levy is at MIT, Richard Bernard is at Harvard, right across the way. And they've written several books and a paper that is very accessible. It's up online. You can Google search it, Dancing with Robots. And basically they have looked at the big economic trends and the impact of both technology and globalization on the work that humans are now being asked to do, as opposed to the work that machines are doing, right? And you'll see in this quote from the paper that there's a couple of implications of their analysis. One, increasingly the work that humans are actually being paid to do are the kinds of jobs that that you cannot write standard operating procedures for, and that involve working with new information. The flood of new knowledge and new information that is coming across our desks every day is hugely important in the jobs that human beings need to do. Because you know what? Machines are not very good at sifting through information and figuring out what information is valuable for solving the problems that you actually have. It's complicated, it's messy, and it requires a level of judgment and prior knowledge that machines are not so good at having. Standard operating procedures. If you can write standard operating procedures to do something, it is likely it's going to be done by a machine. If it isn't already, someone's working in Google or Microsoft to actually figure out how to get the machine to do it. Those are actually the kinds of jobs my dad did his whole life, put his kids through college doing. It used to be a way to actually have a middle-class life. Most of the things that he did actually can be now done by machines, and in fact are being done by machines. So what does that mean in terms of the jobs that are left for people to do? So this is a chart from this report. It actually charts growth rates of jobs in the economy that predominantly require one of 5 different skill sets. They so basically carved up the economy into big chunks. The jobs that require those things that I just talked about, working with new information and solving unstructured problems. And as a share of the economy, their percentages are going up and up and up, as you can see. And then there are 3 others: routine manual tasks, routine cognitive tasks, and non-routine manual tasks. So in terms of those categories, you probably can envision the routine manual tasks. Those are the things my dad did. Routine cognitive tasks, those are the things my mother, who was a secretary, used to do, that often lots of machines now do. And then non-routine manual, think of the woman who's back at my hotel cleaning my hotel room. That's a non-routine manual task. And there's still those jobs. There are still those jobs in our economy. They are just not growing as much as these other jobs. And the truth is, those other jobs are the college-educated jobs. That's why we have an explosion of people who want college. That's why economists and employers constantly are saying that despite what it looks like, we're actually going to be short college-educated workers very, very soon. They're actually quite concerned about that. So that's sort of the big economic picture, but what do employers actually say? What are the employers saying when they're hiring Boston College graduates? We have done a series of surveys, 5 of them over the last 10 years. We've tracked some of the findings across time, and in some cases we've asked new questions. I'm just going to share a little bit of the data from the most recent survey we did, which was back in January. We released it last January. But as Barb said, all of the findings from all our surveys, including slide decks from all of them, are up on our website, amcu.org/leap. And you can find all those, and you're welcome to use them. So what did we find? Couple big messages. One, it's a both-and picture. We asked questions not only about how do we prepare students to get that first job. Other people are dealing with that. We wanted to go for the long haul, right? We're preparing students for a lifetime of professional success, not just one job. So we said, okay, what is most important for being promoted over time, for succeeding over the long term in our company? We interviewed, by the way, small, medium people from small, medium, and large companies. And we interviewed people at for-profit companies as well as not-for-profit organizations that hire a lot of college graduates. You can find all the methodology on our website. So we asked what was more important for long-term success. And you will see the big green part, that's the both-and picture. It is both breadth as well as specific skills needed in a particular setting. It is both-and. However, I will say that over time, we asked this question over, I think, maybe 3, maybe even 4 of the surveys. That blue part, basically the breadth part, has gotten bigger. And the knowledge and skills that only apply to one job has gotten smaller from 2006 to now. So if anything, the broad, cross-cutting, transferable skills have become even more important over time. We also wanted to dig in. An awful lot of people are tracking, okay, if you major in this, you're going to make that much, and if you major in it and you went to Boston College, you're going to make this much more than that. We think that's actually not very productive or constructive. So we wanted to ask some questions about, okay, regardless of what you major in as an undergraduate, what are things that that you, as an employment community, think every single college student should experience. And for those of you, there's probably some social scientists in the audience who know how sort of public opinion surveys work. There's a couple things you want to look for. One, there's relative agreement about all of these big things, breadth, liberal arts. It's not the case that the employment community doesn't think liberal arts and sciences are valuable. They do. But what also is important in this kind of question where you're asking strongly agree, somewhat agree, you want to look for things that just pop out as unusually strong. And you have one of those here in a big way, right? Well, we're in the 80 to 95% if you put the strongly and somewhat together. If you look just at the strongly agree bars, which are the dark blue ones here, you have one that jumps out that nearly 2/3 of employers say every single college student should have experiences solving problems with people whose views are different from their own. This is one of the many reasons why the diversity question is so important, and our ability to not just assemble a diverse campus, but make that campus productive educationally in all its diversity is so important. It's a very top priority for employers, and I would suggest for our society. Those essential learning outcomes, we have tested them over time in all 5 surveys. It's held up rather well. They really are essential. We asked this time to rate each one. How important is this for success in your kind of company? And this sample was across everything from manufacturing to healthcare to law to pretty much really widely represented. And what you have here are the ones that come out at the top, ranked by 80% or more as very important on a scale of 1 to 10. These are all ones that got 8 to 10. A couple things you'll see that I'm sure won't surprise you. Communication is always an issue. They always want us to do more on it, and it's super, super important. Working effectively with others in teams, that's related to that earlier diversity point. But also 2 other things. 81% say it's extremely important that you graduate students with ethical judgment and decision making. So that is obviously in the DNA of Boston College. That's great. It's great for a lot of reasons, but it is great for employment purposes. And it's something that maybe students don't fully understand. Also, we know that they also want us to prioritize giving students practice in applying their knowledge in real-world settings. I'll come back to that in a moment. I haven't been spending too much time on, we also did a student survey this time, and I just don't have time to talk about all the things the students know. But one thing that's very interesting is we actually asked the students too, of all these outcomes, how important do you think they are? And the interesting thing is they get this. They totally get this. These outcomes are the same top ones for the employers as the students. They know what it is they need to be learning. They don't necessarily know exactly how your curriculum lines up with these things, right? I mean, they know this is what they're supposed to be getting out of college, but they're not fully confident about exactly how to connect the dots. Okay, so how do we do this? How do we build students' capacity in these areas? The other part of the LEAP initiative, one other part of it is we've tried to gather a lot of research about what you all are doing. The higher education sector is way more innovative than everybody thinks it is. You are all inventing all kinds of much more engaged, applied ways of teaching these outcomes to students. You'll likely recognize a lot of these things. We've published a lot of research about these capacities, educational research about why they work. And what's important in some ways is not what's on the list, but really why they work. And really why they work is they force engagement on students. They motivate students, and they, in effect, make it impossible to be sort of spectators to their own education. They absolutely require students to be agents of their own education. They're not just sitting in the back row. They're being engaged in problem solving through these activities. So we think these activities are worth investing in. I'm sure you're probably doing at least some of these. And we think they're worth investing in primarily because the educational research shows they work. And the educational research shows, in particular, they work for minority students and students who start out with with lower test scores, with lower grades, who come in less well prepared. They work even better for them. Interestingly, they are the least likely to actually get them. We have this weird situation in higher education where we invent these new interesting things and we give them to the most privileged instead of actually giving them to all students. So that's an interesting thing. We did also ask the employers about these. Again, not because we think employers should be telling us how to do our jobs. They don't want to. We don't need them to. But we were interested in, we're developing all these new programs. Joe and his team are getting more students involved in internships, lots of things happening. And so we asked the employers, if you had a candidate who had done X, Y, Z, we tested a whole bunch of them, would you be more likely to hire this person? Now, a couple things jump out here. Clearly, internships, top of the list. And I think that is mostly because it's something they understand, they know what that means, and they know it's going to mean they're going to have some real-world experience, which really matters to them. But it's also the case that 40% strongly agree that they would be more likely to hire someone who had done a senior thesis or project in which they were able to demonstrate their skills. That's, I think, something that students may not have realized that is really, really important. Not only is it important in terms of their educational and academic skill building, it's important for employment too. And I've talked with lots of students who often just don't realize that they should even be talking about that senior project they did when they're out on the job market, and they clearly should. Also, writing is right up there, research done collaboratively with peers, service learning, all the things that you all are trying to do to get students really engaged are also things that will help them with employment. The Gallup organization has done a whole really broad surveys around the world trying to assess well-being and what are the ingredients of well-being and what actually determines it. And they have tests of career well-being, social well-being, physical well-being, and what really gets you there in communities and countries all across the world. And one of the things they have found is their measures of career well-being are correlated. They're the most important predictor if you have high levels of career well-being. You're more likely to have the well-being in all the other categories. It's incredibly important. So what they have done in the last 2 years is they've taken all this research and they've applied it to college graduates. They've done 2 surveys, big databases, way bigger than anything we've done, 30,000 people, and they have asked about elements of well-being, and then they have also asked, they're all college graduates, they've asked them about what they did in college, various experiences that they had. Now they're not recent graduates, there are 30,000 people, so all of us who went to college. So that's important to remember. And then what they did was they correlated, so it's correlational data, not causation, but it's very strong correlational data, that if these college graduates report that they are engaged at work, highly engaged at work, they are 2 times more likely to report having had these experiences in college. All 3 of them. An internship, active in co-curricular activities, and worked on one of those projects for 10 years or more. If you do all 3 of those, you're twice as likely to be in a job where you describe it as one that's really a good job, in fact, not just any job. It is also the case that if you report having had professors who care about you as a person, a mentor who encouraged your goals and dreams, and at least one professor who made you excited about learning. If you report strongly agree with all 3 of those things, you're also more likely to be thriving in all areas of well-being. Now, I found this one interesting because in some ways, when we strip away all of the educational research and all of the new practices, this is what quality at Boston College is about. I'd be shocked if you could get through Boston College without having some professor get you excited about learning. I would be shocked if you did not somehow get a mentor as you're going through Boston College who encouraged you and who cared about you as people. This is what we should be about. Actually, surprisingly low numbers of those 30,000 report having all these things, or strongly agree with all them. It's a bit low, yeah, really low. I think it's about 12%. Yeah, the number is truly shocking. Now that's strongly agreed, so they only report the strongly agreed. But anyway, so what does all this mean? What does all this economic data mean? What does all this broader public opinion data mean for the curricular change agenda, for our change agenda? Well, I think there are 4 bits of recommendations that I have out of all of this. One, we still are very fragmented in how students make their way through our curriculum. We get an experience over here, we take gen ed over here, we do majors over there, we have an internship over here, and we're not doing a lot to help students integrate all those experiences. And when you can integrate those experiences, it's more likely the student will be seeing themselves develop that full complex of skills, and will be able to talk about it. That telling the story of what you are learning and how you learned it and what you can do with your learning is hugely important in the employment question. So we need a lot more integration. I think we need to really redesign our pathways, both in general education and in majors, hopefully in more integrated ways, to be rich in those engaged high-impact practices. Not having those as the separate thing you might do on the side if you're interested in it, but those have to be at the center of those educational pathways that our students are on. We also don't talk to our students enough about what the outcomes are that we're trying to develop. We might do it in a major, we might do it in a course, but we don't have enough conversations with students about what it's all supposed to add up to. What does it mean that we're supposed to be developing critical thinking? How are you doing that step by step by step? Because none of those outcomes that I just talked about can you get good enough at in one experience or in one course. They all have to be developed iteratively over time, developed over time. That's one of the huge advantages that Boston College, which has students captive for 4 years in a row, has. Not a lot of students don't go to college that way. You are really lucky that you have them in that way, and we should be communicating with them all the way along about how they're developing those skills and how their curriculum is doing it. They're also learning, as we all know, from lots of experiences, not just in the classroom, but through all the co-curricular things that are so rich on a campus like Boston College. And again, it's all out there, it's a big buffet, which they can choose from, but how are we helping them put all those pieces together and really see and be able to talk about how they fit together and how they make choices, right? You probably offer them a massive number of opportunities. They can study abroad, and they can do research, and they can do service, and we have to really help them make those choices. They can't do everything. But you want them to take advantage of things in those ways, and we want to connect them. I also think I talked this morning with the career staff about this. Our academic advising and our career advising, at least in most institutions, are not connected. And that's just shooting ourselves in the foot. There's no reason why those two things can't be iteratively connected. How we're advising students about the majors that they are choosing, the courses that they're choosing, should be an educational choice, but it can also be connected with their vocational aspirations. It's not either or. And then finally, we do have to help students learn to talk about all of this. Rehearse their own story of their own vocational exploration and what it is they are learning and what they know how to do. This is also happening more and more online. They have digital identities. And one of our jobs is to help them craft a constructive, productive, meaningful digital identity that will not hurt them on the job market. Lots of things on those Facebook pages. But instead, develop a digital identity that really accurately portrays all that they have experienced and learned in college and developed. And both those things, generally, they both kind of exist, but we're not helping them curate their own digital identity. They're doing it on their own, and you probably have really smart students who are doing it brilliantly. But you can help all of your students do it. And I think that's an important part of what we want to do. So I want to end with two things, with a visual and with returning back to some questions. As some of you know, ASCM has worked a lot on general education. What is the role of general education in all of this? And a lot of campuses are looking again at their gen ed programs. How can we make them work better? And our most recent project, which is a project funded by the Gates Foundation called General Education Maps and Markers, we published a book just this past year called General Education Transformed, and this is just a visual from it that the author Paul Gaston put together. And I like it because, one, it puts student learning at the center. It puts the student and his or her learning at the center. And it recognizes that that learning happens from a lot of different places, and it's all should be feeding into that identity that student needs to develop. Gen ed, major, what they've learned before, what their working lives are like, service learning, all those things should be coming together to advance the outcomes that students have. And two things, sorry, I forgot about this one. So there are millions of ways in which you and lots of other colleges and universities are doing this. These are 4 examples out of hundreds of careers. So I encourage you to go to our website. We really have hundreds of stories about how colleges and universities are carving up and doing some of these things. These are just 4 examples. So the University of Washington has developed this thing they're calling the Husky template, which is literally a template that they use in academic advising as well as career advising together to help students really translate what they're doing in the classroom, what they're doing in their majors, into professional language that they can use to talk about what they are learning. University of Richmond just instituted something they're calling the Richmond Guarantee. They are guaranteeing every single student a paid internship or a research opportunity. Mount Holyoke College is doing something similar. They also are guaranteeing a paid internship. Obviously, this is all about money. But they are also doing an entire sort of program they call the LINK program. So it's not just they're saying, go get an internship, we'll pay for it, but they're trying to integrate the cultivation of those internships in their curricular pathways. So it's a very much more integrated approach. Clark University, not too far from here in Worcester, is trying to integrate a lot more applied learning for all students. And they're doing it by partnering with employers, partnering with big companies, public entities, as well as for-profits, and not just saying, well, we'll place our student out there in an internship and then they'll come back and we'll hope things went well. But instead they're saying, no, let's have an ongoing partnership where you tell us a problem that you have that we can actually have an entire course built around so that it really is not just you go out there and sort of hang around Massachusetts General for a while. Instead, it's, oh, wait a minute, I'd love to have the geology class come in and help us solve this problem that we actually have. It's pretty exciting, and they've just launched it. So now, questions. I want to end by saying that I do think more important than ever, we as educators who believe in liberal education and believe in Jesuit education need to get out there, all of us, talking a lot more about the fact that education is not just about giving students narrow skills for success in the workplace, and it is not just about preparing them to be cogs in a wheel, saying, oh, okay, sir, how do I get this done? But instead, we want to build leaders. We want to build people, we want to educate people who can ask the really tough question, not just how do I get it done, but what is most worth doing? What is most worth doing for me in my life, and what is most worth doing for our society? So thank you all very, very much, and I'm happy to talk to you.